Tourism Minister Lindwe Sisulu has welcomed the resignation of 3 South African tourism board members who have resigned amid the ongoing controversy around the proposal of the R1 billion Tottenham Hotspur sponsorship deal. The agency has wished the 3 board members well and thanked them for their contributions and oversight during their tenure. Enver Dumini, Ravi Nadesan and Rosemary Anderson released a statement yesterday announcing their immediate resignations. In the statement, they cite what they call differing opinions as a reason for their respective departures. On Thursday, the country's tourism body announced that it intends to go ahead with the Tottenham Hotspur deal in the face of widespread opposition. For more on this story, we're now joined by CEO of Southern African Tourism Services Association, David Frost. David, a very good afternoon. Appreciate your time today. This is disingenuous at best and quite scurrilous at worst, is how you've described this impending deal. Unpack it for us, please.
Well, good afternoon. Firstly, there has just been no proper consultation with the private sector at all. Even when just trying to unpack this within South African tourism, it seems that this has taken place in a relatively guarded way. For the Director General of the Department of Tourism to say that he has no knowledge of this is just, I mean, it beggars belief. But the deal in itself of throwing a huge amounts of your budget into a sponsorship deal of this nature is to our mind in the private sector an absolute waste of money. They are claiming that this will increase awareness, and if only 1% of the Spurs people then stampede to high street travel agents and start booking holidays, we'll get all the money back. It doesn't happen like that. It didn't happen in Rwanda. It didn't happen in the case of Malta. Quite simply, awareness does not translate into conversion into leisure tourism arrivals. And particularly when you're talking about long haul, the drivers that actually that make this happen are affordability, accessibility, and critically what the destination itself actually offers. And there are far more nuanced and sophisticated ways of achieving that. And what we would say, look at the best practice in long-haul international tourism. It's Australia. And they don't go and spend money in this fashion. What they do is their public and private sector work together at inception, and then they execute together.
But can you really compare Australia with South Africa, or Australia with any African destination? A lot of what happens in the media really supports the Western nations.
No, we can quite easily compare tourism destinations. It's about how you as a destination choose to position yourself and the tactics and the practical marketing and sales tools that you put into place. And Australia has led the charge on this for many years. My counterpart, the SATSA equivalent in Australia, was out here a couple of months before we were shut down in COVID. He gave us chapter and verse on this. It's not rocket science. So you can quite easily compare those things. It's about how you choose to play. And unfortunately, we've got a pathological disease in this country, and that is that government parrots on endlessly the rhetoric about partnerships and collaboration. But the fact is, there is no substance to that. And the fact that we, as the private sector, were totally blindsided in a deal of this nature is testament to that. So what we're saying, and we're saying this to the President, Mr. President, this is the second biggest economic sector in the country. It's the one thing we win at, and we do it quite well. We need a reset. And what this has shown us is that the current bunch of people at SAT, I would say both the board and the senior management, we need a total reset because this is incompetence. They do not consult. And if you had a look at that press conference and the arrogant way in which South Africa was spoken to, that's where I start finding this to be quite scurrilous. And then there's a whole lot of other stuff coming out where he says quite candidly there's no agency involved. There's quite clearly an agency involved if you look at the Daily Maverick reporting on the matter. So I think there still probably is a lot to come out. But as the private sector, we are unanimous. This is a bad deal. It is not in the country's interests. And we need a reset in tourism. We need an entity that the private sector can partner with and transact with. We outspend SA tourism 20 to 1 if you add up all the private sector marketing and sales spend. On top of that, we contribute over 100 million rand of the TOMSA levy to the coffers of SAT. We have an MOU with them that they do not adhere to. So we need some proper governance, and we need the guy at the top to actually take this industry and actually let's do the right thing, and then we can get the sort of success that countries like Australia and other parts of the world enjoy.
Well, David, you describe them as a bunch of individuals, and I assume you don't hold them in too high a regard from that descriptor. But let's talk about tourism arrivals to South Africa. Who are our biggest visitors? Where do they come from?
Pre-COVID, we got 2.6 million what we call overseas arrivals. So these are non-African arrivals. These are the long-haul leisure tourist arrivals that come into the country. Just for the record, Australia gets 9 million. So they outperform us 2 to 1. Of that 2.6 million, 77% come from North America, Europe, and the UK. The biggest emerging and growing markets
what's that
in the
percentage
world,
from North America?
If you take North America, Europe, and the UK together, those markets, the North American market, the European market, and the UK market, collectively account for 77% of our arrivals. And India and China, which are the fastest growing international arrivals and massive, only both of those collectively are 6%. And what we're saying is if we are going to look at growth and look at doubling and getting to a proper, real tourism arrivals, the growth has got to come from those emerging markets. Yes, we've got to defend North America and our European market, but to think that we can get double-digit growth out of a mature market like the UK at the moment that's not feasible. So we need to put our heads together. We've come up as the Tourism Business Council with a very well thought through growth strategy. This has been shared, and what we do all the time is we share this with our public sector colleagues. It was shared through the PPGI at the highest level with the presidency. We've also shared this with SA Tourism. What we find is this is never reciprocated, and what we need is a proper structured engagement where we can put our best minds in each particular market together and strategize about what is the best way to synergize and spend what in hard currency terms are relatively meager resources.
So a couple of questions for you, David. Firstly, secondly, I'd like to hear a little bit about this strategy that you've come up with that you feel will allow for growth in those emerging markets. But the first part is, you have a billion rand. How would you spend that billion rand?
Well, if we had that, there's the budget of R1 billion. The way I would spend it is, and it's not just me, what we've been arguing for as the private sector is to set up a proper structured engagement. So you break the world down into your constituent target markets. At the moment, the SAT has 24. We have no problem with that. There's your 24 sort of key markets. And in those markets, you have mature markets like North America and Europe, but you also have emerging markets. And you also have a number of special interest markets. You have areas like golf tourism, you have birding, you have culinary tourism. So there are a number of areas where we have a competitive advantage. And the best way to spend your marketing budget is to get the best brains of the private sector together with the best brains of the public sector and to come up with specific strategies in each key market that we can advance. And in doing so, we would look at international best practice. We would look at what countries like New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, and even if you want to move into the relatively sort of new market, a sort of new period, I mean, some of the best practice coming out of how a country like Saudi Arabia is positioning itself. So there's a lot of very interesting, nuanced marketing tactics that can be brought to bear. But the way to do that is to put the SAT best brains together with the private sector best brains and to come up with joint strategies that are agreed on, and then to actually have an overall body that could oversee this, made up of both public and private sector people, that are then able to apportion the budget accordingly. And if we can do that, if we can sit down and have proper engine room, this is nitty-gritty stuff, tactics like that, I think that would be a really sort of useful way forward. Another way, and I might just put this out there because I've been quoted in the press on this, and this was 4 years ago, is our brand is relatively smelly. After all, the state capture, a whole lot of issues. We don't have a great brand out there. And what we need is something sanitized and cool that can cut through that and say to the world, we're actually a fun place to be. Australia did this 30 years ago with Paul Hogan, and it was in the whole ad built around Crocodile Dundee. We've never really had a Crocodile Dundee, but we do have one. And it's in the form of a guy called Trevor Noah. The world thinks he's cool. He's known in America. He's known in the UK. His dad's Swiss German. What about building a funky, cool campaign around a guy like Trevor Noah, who is perceived to be cool and can put a positive message? And in that, we can draw in an amazing array of stuff. Now, that to me, and that would not cost R1 billion. We could do that far more cost effectively. But David, if we had a cool campaign that the world spoke about, and that people, when you walked into, as we do as the trade, when we walk into our counterparts, into the big 12
David,
Europe,
allow me to
they need to get excited.
Allow me to come in there for a minute. Brilliant idea to have Trevor Noah be the ambassador of South African tourism or of South Africa as a nation. But my question is, are people particularly concerned with the smelliness of a destination or the politics around a destination? I mean, we talk about the World Cup in Qatar recently, the human rights allegations of human rights abuses there in Saudi Arabia. People are still going to those countries, right? Issues happening in Kenya, for instance, and Kenya has amongst the highest arrivals on the continent. So if a destination is safe and its politics is not proper or perceived to be democratic, does it actually stop individuals from visiting those destinations? Or is the average visitor not too bothered about the smelliness of a destination, if you will?
Look, I think what we've got to do is make South Africa an aspirational place for people to come and visit. What the research shows at the moment is that we have high awareness, and that's where we disagree with this campaign. This campaign is predicated on driving awareness. We have high awareness, but the awareness is tarnished to a large degree by a whole lot of negatives, including perceptions around safety and security. So and that then translates into a low conversion rate. So what we need to do, and what would be incredibly useful for us, and this doesn't mean that nobody comes. It means that less people come than would come if we were able to position ourselves as a cool, fun place. And when you look at what happens when people do come here, we have one of the highest repeater rates in the world. That's because people realize how nice it is, how safe it is.
So when tourists are coming to South Africa, what specifically are they coming to see?
Well, look, our biggest draw card historically has been around wildlife. We are fortunate enough to have a world city in the form of Cape Town. We have an incredibly rich culture. We have a very rich and a unique history, one of the few countries that have managed to come through the dastardly years of apartheid and in the way that we have. So we have a great sort of value proposition. But what we've got to do is we've got to go out and position that in a in an appetizing way to the world. We've never really had a great tourism campaign. I mean, there are many examples of these happening elsewhere in the world. And why it's important and why I say this is, and I was just making a point, we are sold in the main in terms of leisure tourism through overseas tour operators. And they don't only sell South Africa. We generally are quite a small part of their business. So when we walk in and we want to transact with them and we want them to put more money and more marketing money and muscle behind our destination so we can get more people here, they've got to get excited about it. But when your brand is smelly and there are a whole lot of negative reports all the time, whether it's load shedding or negative reporting around military exercises with Russia and China, etc. You know, this is a disincentive to the collective tour operators globally to actually invest in us as a destination. So,
David,
yes,
I'm afraid we've run short of time. I have to thank you for your time this afternoon.